spinning. It's spinning. Shalom, Haverim, and hello, friends. And welcome to all the people out there in the internet world who are watching right now. Hopefully somebody watches this. Too much work goes into nobody watching. Oh, but unfortunately I can see that right now it's 0. But anyway, it is good to be here with you on this Sunday morning. It's really been a wonderful week, and it's just good to be here to breathe in and breathe out, to rest and enjoy the company of our fellow brothers and sisters. Now, I heard a story this week about an old man, and this old man was wandering on his property, and he fell into a well. Do you know why the old man fell into the well? Because he couldn't see well. It's not real. It's not. All right, it's just a joke. And, I also heard this week a quote from the poet David Frost. And David Frost is a well-known writer and intelligent person. And David Frost differentiated between having one child and 2 children. David Frost says, having one child makes you a parent. Having 2 children makes you a referee. Some people are out there, yeah, amen, right? What are we talking about today, my friends? We are talking about being a family. My sermon title for this morning is Family Codes. And we know that families look different. There's families that are made up of grandparents and grandchildren and everything in between, the young and the old, aunts and uncles. Unless you're from Virginia, then they're aunts and uncles. We have a variety of people in our family. Families become blended, and not everybody in your family looks like you. But we're not talking about our blood and flesh kind of families today. We're talking about our church families. And church families can look all the more different. And sometimes that makes it all the more difficult to live together as a family. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at that text that Dwayne read for us. Thank you, Dwayne. And we're going to start from the bottom and work our way to the top. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the end first, then go back to the beginning and work back to the end. Does that make sense? It's kind of like the theme from the movie Back to the Future. We're going back to the future, only to go forward again, but we'll get where we need to be. But we're going to start by looking at the end of this verse, this chapter. We'll go back to the beginning to talk about the family, and we're going to try to tie it all together. All right? You're excited? We can do this. Okay. So, if we go to the very end of this passage, we go to actually what starts to be the first and second verses of the 5th chapter of the book of Ephesians. This is Paul's letter to the church in Ephesus. And you may notice that Paul starts with some really high expectations for the church. Who does Paul say to be like? Who are we supposed to follow? Whose example? Yeah, right, God. No challenge there, right? We're just going to go ahead and be just like God. Not a difficult thing to do at all. And I've noticed that as I read through the Bible, there's this kind of this back and forth, this extreme polar opposites. You have these stories about grace, where Jesus is forgiving people. The woman at the well, the prostitute, the sinners. Jesus is offering grace and forgiveness. And then other places, there's this extreme expectations of people, really high bar that has been set. Be like God. Okay. And it reminds me of the passage in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verse 48. Jesus says this. He says, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, I know some of you are out there like, yeah, I got this. Like any day or any given day, I can be perfect just like my heavenly Father is perfect. No, if that is you, if you can do that easily, if you can be perfect, that puts you in really good company because it's like you and Jesus. Only 2 people that have ever been perfect. Most of us, I think, are going to hear this and say, I have no chance. Like, how am I going to do this? How can I be perfect? I put my shoes on the wrong feet today. How are you expecting me to be perfect? Some people will read these passages, be like God, be perfect, and you just throw up your hand and say, why even try? I am going to fail. I am going to fail miserably. Some people actually take that as a challenge. Like, I know I'm going to fail, so I'm going to fail miserably. Might as well go out with a bang. I didn't mean to call anybody out there. I saw some hands. No, we're somewhere in the middle, most of us. We're either just going to go out with a bang because we can't do this, or we just throw up our hands and say, I give up. I can't do it. But actually, I think what we need to do here is we need to dissect this a little bit. Are you ready to be a little bit nerdy this morning? Okay, sorry, I think some of you have been back in school and your brains are already filled with all sorts of things like reading and writing and arithmetic, and now we're going to fill it with some things like teleological discussions. Can you handle that? All right, well, we're going to go there anyway. We're going to try to understand what's going on here to understand how we are called to be a family. So I use the big word. The word that is translated here as perfect is the word teleios. I'm not going to make you say it. There's a lot of syllables there. But teleios. And teleios means perfect. But it doesn't mean perfect like you got a perfect score or 100% on your math quiz. The Greek-speaking world would never use teleios to speak of like a baseball player that went up and hit 4 for 4 on in a game. That's not the kind of perfection that this is referring to. Teleios literally means to fulfill one's purpose, to arrive at the reason or thing that you were created to do or be. So I don't want to get too nerdy here, but I know some of you are familiar with Plato, the philosopher. And Plato talks about these forms. Everything has a form in heaven that is in its perfect form. The things that we see on earth are just like a shadow of those forms. When the Greek-speaking world would talk about the teleios, it's a reference to that perfection, the goal, the thing for which we were created. Now, you will sometimes hear in circles, people will use the word teleology or teleological all the time, right? When somebody speaks of something being teleological, they're talking about a method to understand something by focusing on its purpose. All right, so I know that's really heavy. Let me give you an example so we can understand it a little better. What is the purpose? And we're going to look at something as simple as an apple. And my family brought me one today, so I can, you have the big visual example here. We have a real live, not live, is it? No, it's a real plucked apple, a real in-the-flesh apple right here. Now, if I was to ask you to describe this apple, who wants to give it a go? Anybody? Just throw out some examples. Describe this apple for me. It is shiny. It is delicious. What do you think, Duncan? Green and red. Yes, Casey, what do you think? Round. It's crispy and crunchy and juicy. Don't talk with your mouth open. Wait, don't eat with your mouth open. Can't talk without opening your mouth. So we could describe the way it tastes, the way it looks, the way it smells, the way it's made up of things. We could talk about the components of this. This is made up of carbohydrates and fiber. It has nitrogen and potassium and chloride. I don't know what's in an apple. We could talk about how much it weighs. We could talk about if you really want to be technical, the wind resistance or something like that of an apple. You could talk about all these physical characteristics of the apple. But what if we were to make a little apple went flying on my mouth right there. What if we talked about the teleological purpose of an apple? What is the purpose of an apple? It's sustenance, good. To eat. It's nourishment. Originally, an apple, I guess the nourishment was not intended for humans, but it's intended for the apple seed. A tree drops it to the ground. The carbohydrates, the energy that's in the apple, allows the seeds to grow and develop until the tree is old enough and mature enough to synthesize its own photos, to produce its own energy. So the teleological way of addressing an apple, of considering an apple, is to say, what is the purpose of an apple? So when Jesus says, be perfect as the Father is perfect, he's using this word teleios. He's saying, fulfill your purpose. Live for the reason that you were created. And then you will be like your Father. So we read it like this. This is the NIV version. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. If it's so complicated, like I just was like spending the last 5 minutes describing an apple, why does the NIV simply say, be perfect? Well, here's what the Message says. The Message is a modern paraphrase written by Eugene Peterson. Eugene Peterson saw it necessary to write several sentences to describe this verse. The teleological way of looking at it, he says, in a word, what I'm saying is, grow up, which is actually 2 words. You are kingdom subjects. Now live like it. Live out your God-created identity. Live generously and graciously towards others the way God lives toward you. This is what Jesus is saying. He's not just saying be perfect. He's not actually expecting that you're not going to make any mistakes. He's not going to expect that your socks are going to match every day, or that your hair is never going to be out of place, or that you're going to not spit apple out of your mouth when you're trying to preach after taking a bite. Jesus knows we're flawed people, that we're going to make mistakes. But he also knows that we have a purpose, and we are to live for that purpose. We are trying to achieve that purpose. And when Paul says in chapter 5 of Ephesians that we are to be like God, he's not expecting that we're going to be perfect in the same way that God is perfect. But we're called to strive to be what God has created us to be. This is the way Martin Luther himself put it. And Luther was the guy that was famous for saying, it's by grace that you're saved. Actually, Paul said that first, but then Luther said it. Luther's one that focused on salvation by grace alone. Luther says this: this life, therefore, is not godliness, but the process of becoming godly. It's not health, but getting well. Not being, but becoming. Not rest, but exercise. We are not now what we shall be, but we are on the way. This process is not yet finished, but it is actively going on. This is not the goal, but it is the right road. At present, everything does not gleam and sparkle, but everything is being made cleansed. So again, that whole concept of perfection, this teleios, isn't about not making mistakes. It's not about, not occasionally doing things that you wish you hadn't done. It's about working toward becoming who you were created to be. So keep that in the back of your brain somewhere in the, gray matter, brown matter. It doesn't matter, the back part of your brain. And I want to then turn to the beginning of our passage for today. So the heading in the NIV, you should remember that this is something that the modern translators have given, these headings in our Bibles. This is something that the people that translate it and the people who edit the NIV or other versions have given it. The NIV calls this section Instructions for Christian Living. I'm going to give it a different title. This is, that's the NIV. I'm going to give the KJV. That's my personal translation. I call it the Family Codes. It's not original to me. I heard somebody else say it as well. That this is kind of like Paul's version of the Family Codes. And you've seen these before, right? You probably saw the one that I had up here earlier. Anybody have something like this up in their house? Something like that, maybe. Maybe you've seen them elsewhere. You're active on Pinterest, right? All of you. It's all right, Dwayne. It's a judgment-free zone. No. In this house, this one says, we do second chances. We do grace. We do mistakes. We do real. We do prayers. We do I'm sorry. We do loud really well. We do hugs. We do love. We do family. So these are kind of the expectations that a parent might have. They place this on their wall. They're saying that this is what we as a family strive to be. This is our teleos as a family. We're trying to live this out. You think these families are perfect like this? If you actually think some family's going to live this out perfectly. You probably don't have a family. And it doesn't work that way. But this is what we are striving to become. And I like this one. This is kind of a biblically based one. It's got some Christian overtones to it. There's also really fun ones out there as well. Any Disney fans out here? There's a Disney-themed one. In this house, we let it go because Hakuna Matata and all the bare necessities will always be our guide to infinity and beyond. All it takes is faith, trust, and a little bit of pixie dust. We believe in happy endings, and we know that life is always better under the sea because in this house, we do Disney. All right, you got the idea. Maybe one more. This one might appeal to some of those that are 40 years old or up. In this house, we say, how you doing? Pivot, pivot, pivot. And we were on a break. We believe in unagi. No, nothing? Okay. Lobster soulmates and smelly cats. They don't know that we know they know we know. This is not a moot point. I'll be there because you're there for me too. In this house, we are friends. You like that one? We don't let her watch Friends, just to be clear. You can also find ones that are like office themed, like with Dwight Schrute and Jim Halpert and all those people. You can find anything you want. There's very political ones out there as well, talking about what they believe in this house. So these are the household or the family codes. So some people have suggested this is what Paul is doing in this passage. He's talking about a family. And again, he's not talking just about flesh and blood. He's talking about the family of God. In this family, this is what we strive to do. This is our teleios. In this family, we are trying to become the people who are like this. You see, Paul begins this passage by talking about baptism. And in baptism is this new beginning. It's the chance for us as followers of Jesus to come up out of the waters and to tell the world that we are different. We are making this statement for the watching world so that they know that we are going to be different. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. We're not called just to be different. You know, we're all different in our own ways. Some of us are strange and different in other ways as well. But we're not just called to be strange. What I like to say is we're called to be different from the world when the world looks different than Jesus. So Paul gives this list of ways in which the church is called to be different. The church as the family of God, these are some of the household or family codes for Paul's family. Paul says this is my paraphrase. In this house, we speak the truth to our neighbors. We don't go to bed angry. We don't steal. We only speak to build others up. We rid ourselves of bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander and malice. In this house, we are compassionate. We forgive. We strive to live as Christ did before us. So this is my version. I typed that up and, follow me on Pinterest for more ideas. I'll sell you a copy, Mike. You can. So this is Paul's understanding of the household codes, or this is my paraphrase of Paul's understanding of these family codes. So let's break this down verse by verse, code by code. He begins by saying, in this house we tell the truth. Now, when I think about this, it doesn't sound like a big surprise, right? I kind of assume that when people talk to me that you are actually telling me the truth. I like to assume that when my wife said, that shirt looks good on you today, that she wasn't just telling me that. Okay, no, and maybe I'm being naive, that people will just as soon lie to my face, but can we admit that's probably a good thing, that we should be telling the truth? Okay, now a trick question. Let's get a little more challenging. Is there ever a time when it's okay to lie? Said that with a lot of confidence, but I'm going to push it out a little bit. And I'm not disagreeing with you, so you know. But I want us to think a little bit more about this. Have you ever heard the story of Corrie ten Boom? Corrie ten Boom, she grew up in the Netherlands, a Dutch Christian. And her family helped to move Jewish people during the Holocaust. They helped house them and hide them in their actual house. Eventually, they were captured, the Ten Boom family, and they were taken themselves into concentration camps. Years later, Corrie Ten Boom, she's now passed away. She would write books about her experience helping the Jews find free passage away from the Nazis. So in her writings, she tells a story about her sister, Nolly. And Nolly grew up just as Corrie did in this Christian home in the Netherlands. But Nolly had, after she had moved out of the house, she had this potato bin underneath her kitchen floor. And like a big hopper where they would just store their dry goods for the winter. And it had like a latch. So, I mean, kind of think of, if you've ever been to like the Shakespeare Center, you know, they have that trap door, you can go down onto the stage. I'm sure it was just like that in the Netherlands in the 1930s and 40s. Anyways, they had this latch in the floor. They put the potatoes down there. It was a small room, but they could actually house people there in case of an emergency. They would close the lid, the latch, put a small rug over top of it, and they put their kitchen table on top of that. Well, one day, as Nolly was in her kitchen with her sister Corrie, these young boys came running into the house. They said, "The Nazis are looking through houses, searching for people. Will you hide us?" So Nolly said, "Yes, of course, we will hide you here." They got down into that potato bin. She covered it up with the latch, and then the carpet, and then the table. And the Nazis were just 2 houses away, and they finally came to this house, and they asked Nolly and Corrie, "Are you hiding anybody in this house?" And Corrie reflected upon this years later, and she said, "Surely if there ever was a time that God would forgive us for telling a lie, this would be the time." But here's Nolly, and you know what Nolly said? She says, "Yes, we're hiding people here. They're under the table." And as the Nazis started to look under the table, Nolly started laughing hysterically. Like, you know the kind of nervous laugh that you have? Like when Kevin tells a bad joke and you feel like you have to do something just to break the pressure. No, she just starts laughing hysterically as the Nazis start looking under her table, and they thought she was mocking them. And they left in like a huff. They were angry because she was making fun of them. And Nolly then would interpret this as God protecting them for telling the truth. So I ask the question one more time. Is it ever okay to tell a lie? And I don't want an answer, to be honest. And I don't think the answer is really what's important here. In this house, we tell the truth. And what we're doing here, this struggling, this asking these questions, you know, some people would just as soon lie to you as to tell you the actual weather. You know, what's the weather out? It's raining. You know, some people would you just can't trust them. Sometimes it's a pathological thing. Some people just are liars. But we as Christians, we as followers of Christ are called to be the kind of people that tell the truth. And it's going to come down to things like your ethical framework, and that's another nerdy conversation for another day. I'm sorry you only get one nerdy thing per day, but we can talk about that another time. It's going to come down to your ethical framework and which framework you operate out of. But I think the point is we are the kind of people who struggle with these questions. We're the kind of people who default to truth telling. Let's go to the next one. The family of God in this household, we don't go to bed angry. And I say, if I don't go to bed angry, I'd probably never get any sleep, right? That was a joke. Come on now. Where was that awkward humor? No. Okay, I was in the park the other day, and I was walking the dog, and there was 2 gentlemen that were kind of jogging beside me. Not part of my group. I was not with them. I had no idea who they were, but I heard one of the men paraphrase this. There was obviously some marital issues going on. And the one guy said, I know you're struggling right now with your wife, but remember, Paul says, don't go to bed angry. And I think it's really good marital advice. It's really a good idea to not go to bed angry, because then it first of all, it ruins your entire night of sleep, unless you're a really deep sleeper. Probably ruins your next day as well. The idea is to resolve things before the sun goes down. The problem with that is, if you read this in context, where does it mention their spouse? It doesn't, no. Where does it mention your relationship with anybody? It does definitely refer to a relationship, It doesn't mention your marital relationship. This is not about not letting the sun go down on your anger with your spouse. This is about not letting the sun go down on your anger with another Christian, another follower of Jesus. And the more I thought of this, I would have much rather had the other option. It'd be so much easier to say, okay, we're going to resolve things between the two of us rather than the 2 million or 2 billion of us. Now, the thing about this is, I don't think you have to take it literally to take it seriously. Let's just look here real quick. No, I don't have it here. The passage says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. I don't think it's meant, like, I wrote it down. The sun goes down today at 8:02 p.m. I don't think that you are meant to have everything worked out between you and all the other Christians by 8:02 p.m. Is that a good idea? Okay, that's good. All right, good. Because we've been doing this for 2,000 years, fighting. Let's get all the Catholics and the Lutherans together and have it all resolved by 8:02 p.m. And the Presbyterians and the Baptists, you've got to get this predestination thing ironed out before the sun goes down. No, that's not the point. When Paul talks about don't let the sun go down, he's talking about the end of the opportunity. Because at the end of the day, there's no more day left. Don't allow this time to pass without working things out. This is about reconciling to people. This is about being humble in approaching people and understanding what your division is. Now, Paul's not saying that you're going to have it all worked out. But he is saying we can't go to bed angry. He is saying don't let that anger continue to build within you. Work through that. You might not solve all of your problems. You might not solve all your differences, but at least be able to call that person a brother or sister at the end of the day. So Paul says don't let the sun go down on your anger, because if you do, you give the devil a foothold. All right, let's go on. Let's keep going. We've got a few more. Don't steal. I thought the first one, that seemed rather obvious, right? Tell the truth. Don't steal. Do I have to go into details here? All right, no, actually, wait a second. Did you read that whole passage? It's kind of weird. Paul's like, yes, don't steal, but he doesn't stop there. This is what he says. Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. It's not enough that you just don't steal from people, that you're not a mooch and not robbing people blind whenever you have the chance. What Paul is saying is that followers of Christ will work. And not only will they work, they'll give a part of what they earn away. Right now in our world, I think so many people are living above their means. You've heard that phrase before, people living above their means. When I hear people talk about credit card debt, I'm not meaning to call anybody out here. I know we all have different things that we struggle with, but like credit card debt, college loans. Some people, before they retire, they hope to pay off their college debt. Car payments and mortgages on houses that they can't afford. So many of us are swimming in debt, and I'm not immune from this. Don't ever hear me come across as if I've got this all figured out. But what Paul seems to be saying here is that Christians are actually called to live below their means. You're called to live below your means. So if you can afford this $300,000 house, maybe you buy a $200,000 house. If you can't afford a $200,000 house, or if you can afford that, maybe you buy a $100,000 house, so that you can free up finances to help other people. And the biblical model is essentially this: live off of 90% of your income and give 10% to charity. And maybe we could go even further than that and say, hey, how about if you give 10% to charity and 10% to savings and live off of 80% of what you've made? When I talk about being different, so often the Mennonite church has interpreted this as like what we wear and what we drive. The traditional Mennonite garb, you have the plain coat for the men and the chin strap beard, and the women have their plain dresses, and that's all well and good. But I think that Paul cares less about whether we wear plain coats and plain dresses, but I think that what he's calling us to is to not wear the Gucci suits. I don't think God really cares if you drive a buggy or not. If you want to drive a buggy, drive a buggy. Just stay out of the fast lane, please. But maybe you don't need the Lamborghini. Can we live below our means so that we can help those who can't work, those who have other issues that prevent them from being able to be self-sufficient? All right, I need to keep moving. We're going to put the rest together in one family rule here. And the last one is the hardest for me, and that's why I have to slow down and catch myself. This is the one that I struggle with. In this house, we use our words to build others up. Now, here's the thing. I like a good joke. I like to joke around with people. And I think that it's kind of, I grew up with brothers. And that should be a reason enough. Oh, I get you. This is why we grew up. We busted on each other. And that's how I grew up showing my love. Not a critique on the family system, but this is how I grew up. Like, this is how we showed our love for my brothers. And if you have siblings, maybe you grew up in the same way. You know, I busted on you. That means I actually care about you. And then I find myself to this day, I'm 41 years old. And if I bust on you, that means I like you. I was like, that's why I didn't have a girlfriend growing up. Like, I pulled Susie's hair, and now that's how I show her I like her. No, if I bust, I'm looking at Curtis over here right now. Curtis, I sat down with Curtis and had coffee the other day, and I said to him, do you ever wish that you would have raised your kids liking a football team that was good or something like that? And I felt bad about that later, but you know what? That means I like you. It's still kind of funny, too. The point is that's not okay. I'm not building people up by busting on them, even if it is the way I was raised, and even if it is the way I show my love and appreciation. That's wrong. But so often, you know, I'm doing this in a lighthearted way. So often when we build people or tear people down, it's done because, at least for me, because I'm jealous of them. How often have you heard somebody tear another person down because, you know, maybe they're more intelligent than them? Can you believe what, you know, this person said, you know, in the newspaper, or when they got this article published, or in that book that this guy published with this big publisher, he said something really stupid. You know, maybe I'm just being jealous because I can't get anything published. Or you hear somebody talk about the dress that somebody wore to the PTA meeting. You know, can you believe she wore that short dress, you know, and show those long legs of hers? You know, sometimes it's just jealousy that we show. And often I feel like when I tear other people down, even if it's only in my mind, you don't want to see what goes on up here sometimes. When I tear people down, it's often because they have something different in their mind, theologically, ideologically, or politically. So in my mind, I tear them down a few steps so that I can feel superior to them. Look at what Paul says here in detail. He says this in verse 29. He says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. I find this convicting because I tear people down. How can we use our words to build people up? Well, we in the Mennonite Church, we really like this passage. It's found in a couple places, but Isaiah says it really clearly, where he talks about taking our swords and pounding them into plowshares, and our spears and turning those into pruning hooks. You've heard this passage? Taking these weapons of war and turning them into things that we can use to cultivate and grow and build and develop. Mennonites really love these passages. They're really great for transforming our hate and our anger into something that's productive and life-giving. The most recent article, or recent magazine of our denomination, the Anabaptist World, our denomination puts out this magazine every month, and it had this article in it about a recent conference that one of our series of churches, that one of our conferences held. And I'm sorry, that wasn't real clear. Anyways, there was an article in a magazine about Mennonites. You got that part? In this article, it talked about these speakers that shared at this conference. And the writer of the article, they weren't named, so I can't quote them directly, but they talked about how they use these images of building, taking our swords and turning them into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks. They used this to discuss the way that these presenters shared. The author wrote, "The speakers challenged attendees to beat their weapons of death and war into instruments of life and growth, including ways we use our tongues to speak words of life or death to others." I had never thought of it that way, that our tongue is sometimes used as a weapon. Rather than tearing people down, even if it's done in jest, even if I'm making fun of your football team, whatever it might be, what if instead I use to build people up? What if we use these powerful things in our mouths to give life instead of death? Now, I know this isn't easy, and I know that there's all sorts of ways that we need to nuance this. This is just kind of scratching the surface because when we talk about things like correcting people and speaking truth in love, that's not necessarily meant to tear people down. It is meant to give them life and to build them up. We need to continue to tease this out and ask specific questions about how this will work in real life. Just like that question about, is it ever okay to tell a lie? We need to continue to tease out these questions of when and how to speak truth in love to people, to build them up and not tear them down. But I come back to the very way I began this passage, this sermon this morning, with this idea of our teleios. This is our purpose. It doesn't talk about being perfect as if we're never going to make mistakes, but that we have this purpose for which we were created. And this passage tells us that we were created to be the family of God. And families are not always easy to get along with. Families fight, we struggle, but what else are we called to do? We're called to love, to forgive, to honor, to show respect. So Paul gives us this list of his family codes. And this, again, is not an exhaustive list. There's many things that we can continue to look at, and we will over the next couple of weeks. That's how you know you've been talking too long, when your tongue gets numb. But over the next few weeks, I want to be talking about these things, asking how we are called to live as a family. What is our purpose, and how can we live into that perfectly? Well, this brings us to the time for our prayer and sharing time. And I just want